In this video, I'm going to show you how you can get up and running with WebSockets very quickly. To show you what I mean, we will end up with two browser tabs that can communicate across the internet using WebSockets. So in this example, we can type in a message on this browser tab and we will see it immediately appear in the other tab, and vice versa. Now these browser tabs could be other sides of the world. As long as they're connected to the internet and our WebSocket server, they can easily communicate with each other. This is very handy, not just for chat applications but also for multiplayer games. So to get started, you're going to need two pieces of software. You're going to need Visual Studio Code. So if you go to code.visualstudio.com, and you can download Visual Studio Code for your relevant operating system. They have a version for Mac OS, Windows and Linux. So download and install Visual Studio Code. Then you will want to go to node.js.org and download and install node.js again for your operating system. Just make sure that you have version 14 or greater installed. Okay, let's get started. The first thing we're going to want to do is open Visual Studio Code, and then if you go to File, Open Folder, and create a new folder for your project. I'm going to call mine WS for WebSockets, SP for snowpack, and ES because we're using ES modules. So then click Select Folder, and let's create two folders inside here. So we want a folder called Client, and right click again, and a folder called Server. Then we want to open the terminal, and I'm going to split this terminal so that we can work in our server folder in the left panel and our client folder in the right panel. For our client, let's get up and running quickly with snowpack. So the first thing we want to do is do an npm init-y, and that will create this package.json file. And then let's immediately install snowpack. So if we do an npm -i -D and snowpack. So as you can see, we've got snowpack as one of our dev dependencies now. And let's also at the same time install our socket.io client. So we do npm -i socket.io-client. And so now you can see in our dependencies we have the socket.io client. So let's go ahead and in our client folder, let's now create our index.html file. And we'll scaffold this out by typing HTML:5, hit enter, and Emmet will scaffold that out for us. And I'm just going to call this WebSockets, and we'll put in a header as well that just says WebSockets. Now we'll create a form, and we'll give this form an ID of form-message, and inside this form we'll create an input of type text. We'll give this input a name of message, and we'll put in a placeholder that says enter your message. Then we'll create a button, and this is going to be a submit button, and we'll say on the button message. Now underneath this form we'll have an unordered list, and we'll give the unordered list an ID of chat dash list, and then just before we close our body we'll specify our script here, and this is going to be called index.js, and we need to make sure that we give it a type of module because we're using ES modules. So if we save that, now we can actually run snowpack to serve that up. So what we want to do is come back to our package.json, and in our scripts here we can just change this test to dev and say snowpack space dev. Save that, and now we can just do npm run dev, and then this should bring up your browser and default to localhost 8080, which is the port that the snowpack dev server defaults to, and we should see our form in here. Doesn't do anything yet because we just need to write some more code. Okay, let's carry on in our client folder. So if we right click the client folder and do new file, and we're going to create that index.js, and the first thing we want to do is import IO from the socket IO client. And then we're going to open up a socket to our WebSocket server by calling IO with the URL address of our WebSocket server, which is at localhost port 3000. Then we want a reference to our form, so we can use getElementById, and we called our form, or we gave it an ID of form dash message, and then we want to handle the onSubmit event on that form, so we do form message dot on submit, and we're going to use an arrow function to handle that event. And the first thing we want to do is to call prevent default so that we don't get a page refresh. And then what we want to do is we want to emit on the socket with an event of message, and then we'll use these backticks so that we can do dollar curly brackets, and we're going to use the first 4 characters of our socket ID as an identifier. Says dollar curly bracket form message dot message, and we can use dot notation because we gave the input a name of message dot value. And then we're going to reset the focus to that input, and then we're also going to clear the message out of that input. Now we're going to handle some events on the socket. So the first one we want to handle is the connect event. Again, we'll use an arrow function. And we'll simply console log out, again using backticks here. And again using this, I'll just copy this. Connected to server. So that's when we get a initial connection to the WebSocket server. And then we're going to handle the message event, which will come back from the server. And the server will essentially be relaying all the messages that it receives out to all its connected clients. And so this is what this will receive that message coming back. So we'll just console log it out. So we're going to create a list item element with create element, and then we want to set the inner HTML of that list item to message, to the message that we've received. And then we want to get a reference to our chat list, which is our unordered list, and we want to prepend, i.e. add it to the top of our unordered list. And we're adding, of course, the list item element that we've just created. So if we Control S to save, and we'll take a look at that. So we right click and do an inspect. Okay, so we're trying to get a connection to our WebSocket server, but it's coming back with an error saying that it's refused. Well, it's worse than that. We actually haven't got a WebSocket server, so that's why it's not doing anything. And of course, this won't do anything, and will actually fail because we haven't got a WebSocket. So let's fix that by actually creating our WebSocket server now. So now in the left terminal, which is in the server folder, we want to do an npm init-y. Again, that will create our package.json with default values in. And instead of snowpack on the server, we want to use nodemon, which will do a similar thing in a way to snowpack, in that it will look for changes in our files and it will restart the server. So if we do an npm install dash capital D and nodemon, And then let's go ahead and install socket.io as well. And again, we will overwrite our test script with dev instead, and this time we want to use nodemon and run our node.js application, but we need to say what our entry point is, and it's going to be server.mjs. And it's important that it's MJS because that means that we want to use ES modules on the server. So it tells Node that we're in ES module land. So let's save that and then go ahead and right click on server, new file. We want to create that server.mjs file. And because we're in ES module land, we do imports, which you may not have seen happen very often in Node, but is totally doable nowadays. And let's do import server from our socket IO. Then it's super simple to create a HTTP server in Node by just doing create server on HTTP, using an equals there. Now we need to send this options object to our WebSocket server, and this just tells the WebSocket server that we're totally happy accepting connections from this localhost 8080, which is where we'll actually be serving up our web page. So we send it in our HTTP server and those options, and then we want to handle the connection event, and that will give us the socket that's connected. And we will say web socket connected, and we will show the socket ID that connected. And then we want to handle on that socket, on that connected socket, the message event, i.e. the message coming in from the client. And we'll console log it out. But we'll also emit it to all the connected WebSockets. And we should definitely remember that we want to start listening with our HTTP server, and let's just console log that happened happily. Okay, so let's start our WebSocket server by doing npm run dev. And as you can see, it's got to this line here, so it's listening, and then it actually managed to get a WebSocket connection. So I must have a tab open. Let's check that out. So I have this tab open, and yeah, we've got this connection connected to the server, and the KJLW, first four characters of our socket ID. KJLW. So if I create another tab, let's inspect that. So we've got another connection here. So we've got this one here that's connected on KJLW, and we've got this one here connected on EBKD. And if we go to our server, we should see the two connections now. Now what we can do, because I'm using this Vivaldi web browser, we can actually show these two tabs at the same time, which is kind of handy, by right clicking and doing tile tab stack. So we now have two tabs open at the same time, and each one has its own connection to the server. And so I can type in here hello, and you can see that it appears on both tabs. So obviously these could be people other sides of the world, and they would see each other's messages. And so if I type in here, you can see that both of these tabs can communicate via this WebSocket server. Hopefully you found that useful. Thanks for watching.